We are all set. Thank you, guys.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Subcommittee on Appropriations briefing on the Maryland Department of Transportation CTP, Capital Transportation Program. I'm Mark Corman. I'm the chair of the subcommittee, joined by my colleagues, Vice Chair Carol Krim, the dean of our subcommittee, Delegate Wendell Beitzel, Delegate Rick Metzger, Delegate and former Transportation Deputy Secretary Kittleman, and joining and crashing today is Delegate Solomon. And also a big welcome to Ken Weaver, who is taking over as our subcommittee staffer, and congratulations to Matt Jackson, who was our subcommittee staffer for a number of years, who has moved on up to work in the office of the Speaker of the House of Maryland. So congratulations to Matt and Ken welcome aboard. Obviously, this briefing on the CTP comes at a difficult time for the department and the transportation budget, as it does for really all Marylanders, all Americans. The numbers I saw, which I believe were from August, the most recent numbers that were shared with DLS on transportation revenue, showed motor fuel taxes down year over year 15%. Titling taxes, interesting, rolling down about 3%. And vehicle registration numbers were up a little bit. I think some of that is just built up demand from the closures that predated August. We don't have the more recent numbers yet, but obviously you all are dealing with some difficult times. You've pointed us before to the COVID-19 stats on your website, which are terrific, but also have some very sobering information. BWI traffic is down 61% in the most current reporting period year over year. Maryland toll facility revenue, or cars rather, is down almost 20%. Maryland Transit Administration ridership is down 55%, but of course we know this across all modes, and the modes are all the same. The really well-named market commuter rail is down, I think, 95%, whereas the MTA bus is down much less. Of course, auto traffic is down now about somewhere between 16 and 20%. Of the will highlight that one in particular. As a result of all these changes, I think the draft CTP that we're looking at is $1.5 billion less than the prior CTP. Although I know a lot of difficult choices. I just want to say that although this hearing comes during COVID-19, it's really not COVID-19 specific. I've long believed that the General Assembly needs to have a much more active oversight role in transportation. It's part of what I ran on when I first ran in 2014, before I knew who was going to be governor or who was going to be secretary. I think it's been unfortunate to see at times the department and the administration's response to legitimate efforts by the General Assembly to bring some more transparency and oversight, things like the transportation scores, which I know still appear in the back of the CTP, and I'll be curious to hear if they have really any impact on the decision making. But I know the secretary shares a commitment to cooperative work and oversight, which I appreciate, along with his business unit heads. So let me welcome the secretary. I know speaking along with him today is Deputy Secretary of the State Highway Administration, Jason Ridgway, Director of Planning and Program Development for the Maryland Transportation Authority, Melissa Williams, MTA Administrator Kevin Quinn, MVA Administrator Chrissy Nizer, our new Maryland Port Administrator, Executive Director Bill Doyle, and Ricky Smith from the Airport Authority. I won't introduce all your other guests, but a special shout out to former District 3 engineer Andre Futrell, who I know is on the line as well. So with that, Mr. Secretary, let me turn it over to you to go through your presentation, and then we'll go to the member questions. Thank you for being here.
Great, thank you so much for having us. I'm going to apologize right from the beginning. It's hard for me to tell who's on, so I'm going to acknowledge as best I can. Good morning. I see Vice Chair Jackson, but Chairman McIntosh, if you're on, good morning. Also Chair Corman and Vice Chair Krim and members of the committee. Thank you for having us here to talk about our draft 6-year Consolidated Transportation Program, the CTP, which covers fiscal years 21 to 26. I'm glad many of you were able to join us for our virtual CTP tours over the last few months, and I do want to apologize if some of this is a little bit of a repeat, but our numbers do evolve and they're updated as we move. It certainly wasn't the same fall presentation that we were used to be making, but we were still able to have what I consider a very productive and informative dialogue with all of our local partners across the state. Today, I'm going to be recapping part of that CTP update, but also touching on what we've heard from those 24 CTP tours in terms of broad priorities, needs, and challenges, and some potential future investments. I have representatives from each of our business unit heads here with me this morning. As Chair Corman noted, Deputy Administrator from SHA, Jason Ridgway, and Andre Futrell, MDTA, Melissa Williams, our Director of Planning and Programming, MTA Administrator Kevin Quinn, MBA Administrator Chrissy Nizer, Executive Director Bill Doyle, who has really hit the ground running, and MAA Executive Director Ricky Smith. Each of them are going to provide a little bit more detail in terms of the respective modal units, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have afterwards. But to dive right in, our team continues to be committed to supporting that transportation network that has frankly been critical to keep that supply chain moving and getting those essential employees to work during this pandemic situation. You know, clearly from day one, our goal was to protect our employees and the people that we serve, and we continue to work extremely hard to keep people moving and safe across our system. And what you've seen in the draft CTP is really a direct result of these startling declines in travel during the pandemic. And so, you know, as we saw really starting in March and peaking in that mid-April, travel volumes were down significantly, resulting in some pretty significant revenue declines across the trust fund. I'll walk you through some of the numbers. When you compare 2020 to 2019, that second week of April with the peak, you know, our highway traffic volumes were down 52%. Right now, they're hovering around 17%. Our truck volumes were never dipped below 27, but they're about 20 now. You know, some critical truck freight was moving during this pandemic. Our toll transactions are about 18% down right now, but they were about 57 at the peak. As the chair noted, our BWI passenger traffic was down, is down about 61% right now. We were at 95 at the peak. All transit was down 70% versus 54% now. And Administrator Quinn is going to touch on some specific numbers in the various services because they are quite different when you look at core bus versus some of our commuter services. At the Port of Baltimore, the number of autos and light trucks shipped through the port was actually up 8% in September compared to last September. So that's a positive trend for us. But despite the challenges of operating throughout the department during the pandemic, I do want to take a minute and note that our more than 10,000 MDOT employees and our private sector partners really continued to deliver every day, and they showed up every day and not only kept this machine running, but frankly delivered some pretty critical things. We continue to partner with the Maryland Department of Health and our community in battling that spread of COVID-19, at the same time continuing to make sure that we're able to deliver those key services and facilitate some pretty critical economic activity. And even though our services have increased over the recent months, we're really aware of the growing trend of positive cases throughout the state, and that we're anticipating and frankly promoting some decreased travel throughout this holiday season so that we can minimize that spread. To that end, the impact on our budget remains. Our current 6-year CTP trust fund revenue declines are across the board. Our latest motor fuel tax are down about $636 million. Our titling tax was down about 190. Corporate income tax was down 183. Our operating revenues over at MTA were down 174 million, and over at MAA about 146 million. And then some of those other smaller sources are down about 100 million. So that really equals about $1.4 billion decrease in bond sales, a $1.4 billion decrease in our program, and a bond sale decrease of about $1.5 billion, totaling a change in our CTP of about $2.9 billion compared to the one we introduced this past January. So we're looking at a $13.4 billion draft CTP that reflects some pretty tough decisions across our business units. When we looked at making the adjustments in our business units based on the revenue declines, we put them across the board really, starting at the Secretary's office. We reduced about $23 million in capital, which predominantly is local grant programs, those types of things, and about 5% of our operating budget. Over at SHA, they took the largest hit of about $900 million in capital cuts and 7% of its total operating budget. Over at the Maryland Transit Administration, there was about a $150 million cut in capital with about 5% of its operating budget. Over at the Aviation Administration, about $522 million in capital, although about $500 million of that, Executive Director Ricky Smith is going to talk about, will return once our revenue bond market starts to return there very shortly, and about 8% of its operating budget. Over at the Port of Baltimore, about $227 million in capital cuts and 6% of its operating budget. And over at the Motor Vehicle Administration, about $25 million in capital and about 4% of its operating budget. But every single cut was tough, and the reality is that cutting $2 billion from your capital investments and $98 million in operating costs does have an impact that we will feel. And these impacts were a major part of our county tour discussions this fall. But it was helpful for our teams to hear firsthand about these challenges so that we can try our best to adapt and adjust our available resources and meet their needs and our needs at the same time. But frankly, our vision for transportation and what we're trying to achieve really is the same. It's just those parameters around us that have changed. Earlier this year, when I came in as secretary, I tried to lay out a vision and a focus on investments in this draft CTP, and these focus areas, along with input that we received from the community, will continue to be the key drivers as we develop our CTP. They're really starting with that state of good repair, system preservation. I think that's the core of what we do, building that intelligence and adaptable system, establishing really a sustainable customer-focused transportation vision for the state, looking at roadway, transit, freight, air, and port infrastructure. And this vision is really another piece that we really have to do and really set that foundation for the next development and evaluation program projects. That'll be the projects that we do in the next generation. Continuing to deliver some of those big infrastructure projects that solve some of our congestion problems and our accessibility problems and try and incorporate flexibility and growth. Projects like the Purple Line, the Howard Street Tunnel, American Legion Bridge, these are all really critical for our future. And providing that safe and accessible mobility choices for all of our users, including our pedestrians, our bicyclists, our drivers, our freight carriers, our transit users, and really starting with that interplay between transportation and land use. But it's really about taking care of our system and getting the most out of it with adaptable solutions, investing in that next generation of projects with planning and engineering, and making sure the whole department is customer-focused, system-focused, open, accessible, and responsive. That's really important to me. But it's going to take time. We're looking at another 2 years of recovery if our economic models hold the way they are, and really trying to recover and plan, but also stabilize over the next year or so as we look at those investments. The $13.4 billion draft program, the 21 to 26 capital budget, and the $2.2 billion operating budget are focused on, one, preserving what we have, planning for future projects, and building what we can to support the economic recovery. The breakdown of how the program was constructed is starting with our service modes, which is the Motor Vehicle Administration as well as the Secretary's office. They comprise about 1.4% of the capital budget and about 1.4% of the operating budget. If you look at our economic engines, our Port of Baltimore and our BWI, Marshall, and Martin State Airports, they have about 9.5% of our capital budget and 11% of our operating budget. Over on the transit side, between MTA and WMATA, they're receiving about 39.2% of the capital budget and about 61% of the FY21 operating budget, with MTA alone accounting for about 41% of our operating budget. Over on the state highway side, they have about 39.6% of the capital budget and about 13% of the operating budget. And then finally, our local jurisdictions have about 10.3% of our capital budget for highway user revenue grants. When you look at what we've been able to preserve in this program, we've preserved a lot of system preservation. We feel like that's important. Our Customer Connect Phase 2 project over at the Motor Vehicle Administration, really important foundation for the future for us. The Howard Street Tunnel, some of our dredge work over at Cox Creek was able to be preserved, and I think that's really going to be important for that economic recovery. But this current budget is pretty tough, and we're looking at those important infrastructure investments to support those jobs and accessibility as we navigate the rest of this pandemic. And while we're doing the best we can with the revenue that we have, these declines are frankly pretty tough, and we're continuing to work with our federal delegation on trying to help with that backstop. Just last week, it was interesting. We had a virtual AASHTO meeting. Sadly, we were originally planning to be the host of that meeting in Baltimore, where all the secretaries of transportation across the nation were coming to Baltimore, and that got pushed to a virtual platform, so that didn't happen. But that was exactly what we talked about, whether it's backstop stimulus, more CARES Act, those types of things we are hoping are going to come through. But working together as partners is really important to me. I know, Delegate Corman, you noted that in your opening, and that is really important to me as we work together, not only with every level of government, but with our delegations and the entire MDOT team. But we have some pretty good challenges in front of us, and we're going to work every day, and I'm confident we're going to persevere together. With that, we'll start getting into some of the details, and I'll turn it over to Jason Ridgway, our Deputy Administrator at SHA.
Thanks, Greg. Good morning. If you can all hear me, if somebody could give me a thumbs up, it'd be great.
I can hear you, Jason. You're a little bit faint.
All right, I'll speak up a little bit. How's that, Greg? Good. All right, Greg. With that, good morning, Chair McIntosh, Vice Chair Jackson, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Krim, and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here with you virtually today with the Secretary, and on behalf of Administrator Smith, a privilege to be leading the State Highway team. As you may be aware, our team never stopped working through this pandemic, and as we continued progress on important projects and initiatives. Administrator Smith, he has more of an operational background, and as he likes to say, MDOT and State Highway really shine and rise to the occasion when it comes to managing emergencies, and working through COVID-19 is no exception. Our primary goal was keeping our customers and our employees safe while delivering on our core functions. We advanced projects while practicing physical distancing and following proper health practices, meeting virtually and using appropriate protective equipment. As traffic dipped to 50% lower than our typical volumes, our maintenance crew switched to alternating shifts to reduce the number of workers we had in any one location at any given time, and that allowed us to keep them safe and continue to keep up on our maintenance activities. Once traffic slowly came back and reached closer to expected volumes, our maintenance staff returned full-time with additional proper health protocols. For our construction efforts, fewer vehicles on the roadway allowed crews to expand hours of lane closures, and we could make more progress without impacting the mobility of our customers. This tactic allowed us to speed up the pace of a few projects, and in other cases allowed us to recover from some others that needed a little help. As the Secretary mentioned, budget impacts, State Highway stayed very focused on continuing our maintenance and construction activities. For some projects, we did have to delay certain phases of planning and design efforts into the later years. As we focused our available operational resources on safety and mobility on our system, this resulted in fewer mowing cycles and litter pickup. The good part about supporting our active construction program earlier this year is we've been able to continue and deliver some great projects and new roadway infrastructure for Maryland. And MDOT SHA continues to implement new and innovative treatments to improve bicyclist and pedestrian safety. To touch upon safety for a minute, whether we have a lot of traffic or a downturn in traffic, I would be remiss not to take this opportunity to ask for your support on our work zone safety and Maryland's Move Over law efforts. Even when traffic was down, we were having significant challenge with our work zones, with drivers just not adhering to the law. We have had our equipment and even members of our team struck while assisting disabled vehicles and performing construction and maintenance activities. In closing, as the Secretary mentioned earlier, we are actively working to plan and stabilize our financial future. For MDOT SHA, that means building a shelf of projects in three main areas: asset management, accessibility, and mobility. Asset management is really using a system preservation philosophy to think long-term in our day-to-day decisions while seeking to gain the best return on investment to ensure a sound transportation infrastructure for the next generation. Accessibility has a huge safety component, but it is more about consideration for all users of our system. One way we have changed the way we're doing business is identifying proactive treatments in the context-driven guide that support safe access and mobility for pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists. The context-driven guide is changing the way we deliver projects now, and a Vision Zero philosophy will aid making our roadways safer for everyone. Finally, mobility is about taking advantage of technology and data-driven systems to improve the efficiency of our existing footprint. We are looking at ways to use data, smart devices, and technology more efficiently in the projects we deliver in the future. I appreciate your time, and I will now turn it over to MDTA and Melissa Williams.
Okay, good morning. Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me? Yes? Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that check-in. Thank you very much, Jason. And the Maryland Transportation Authority has maintained operations, completed Bay Bridge projects, and advanced other initiatives during COVID-19. With reduced revenue, we changed some operations and delayed some work. All electronic or cashless tolling was implemented statewide on March 17th to limit contact for both the traveling public and our MDTA toll collectors. After closing in March, we reopened the EasyPass Customer Service Center on June 15th with limited capacity and safety precautions in place. Some key MDTA accomplishments during COVID-19 include completing work to reopen the Bay Bridge westbound right lane, install a new tolling gantry, and deliver full-time all-electronic tolling in advance of our summer goal. We advanced major projects, including the I-895 bridge project in Baltimore and the new Nice Middleton Bridge in Southern Maryland. We worked to develop Drive Easy MD toll modernization, which includes new payment options such as pay by plate and early notice of toll due discount. A new website that will go live later this year, and we reduced civil penalties from $50 to $25 for toll violations. Additional features include new vehicle toll classifications with lower toll rates, which will roll out in phases once the new tolling system goes live. Reductions to MDTA's budget due to COVID-19 means that projects needed to be deferred. The I-95 Express Toll Lanes project has been deferred by 1 year, and cash flows for the Nice Middleton Bridge replacement have been reduced in the draft fiscal year 2021 to fiscal year 2026 CTP. This project completed more work in fiscal year 2020 than originally forecasted. Therefore, the overall budget for the project has not changed. MDTA major projects preserved include the Nice Middleton Bridge. MDTA kicked off major construction in July when the Lieutenant Governor visited the project site with Secretary Slater. The new, wider 4-lane crossing will be open to traffic by early 2023. The facility is now permanently cashless, like all of MDTA's facilities, and highway speed AET with toll booth removal will be completed during this project. The Bay Crossing Tier 1 NEPA study. We anticipate publishing the Tier 1 draft environmental impact statement and identifying MDTA's recommended preferred corridor alternative in the fall of 2020 and holding public hearings in early 2021. The Tier 1 final environmental impact statement and record of decision is scheduled for 2021. If you would like more information about this project, I encourage you to visit baycrossingstudy.com. Bay Bridge ongoing and future work includes the westbound deck rehabilitation of the center and left lanes, the Bay Bridge crossover automatic lane closure system, and the contract award for the eastbound deck rehabilitation, which is expected later this year. I would like to thank you very much and turn it over to MTA to Administrator Quinn. Thank you.
All right, good morning. Everyone can hear me okay? That's always good to do the check. Yeah, great. So good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kevin Quinn. I'm the administrator of MDOT-MTA and happy to be with you this morning. As many of you know, MDOT-MTA is one of the largest multimodal transit systems in the country, operating local bus, metro, light rail, and mobility paratransit in the Baltimore region, as well as commuter bus and commuter rail across the state, and supporting our locally operated transit systems. As the Secretary noted, COVID-19 has really resulted in a major decline in Marylanders' use of transportation services across the state, and transit especially began seeing some of those decreases in ridership in mid-March that really resulted in a decrease in our fare revenues. During the second week of April, which was really kind of the height of the stay-at-home order, ridership on all transit across the state was at an all-time low. And when you compare April of 2020 with the latest ridership statistics from the second week of November, we see that MARC at the height was down about 97%. We're at about 90% of ridership now. Commuter bus was down 95%. It's right now down about 87%. And our local bus system in Baltimore was down about 61%. Right now that's hovering at about 50% of ridership. And throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, we really focused on cleaning, awareness, and overall safety of our employees and our riders, and looking to really reposition our services throughout the state, focus on the core mission and those greatest areas of need. We really quickly implemented enhanced cleaning and disinfecting protocols especially some of those high passenger touch points like ticket vending machines and some of our fare gate readers. We focused a lot on our vehicles, and we've begun replacing anywhere where we have fabric seats with plastic seats, testing out air ionizers, and we're going to continue to look at other cleaning methods. Reductions to the Transportation Trust Fund due to COVID have meant some transit operations need to be pulled back. You may recall, following some public comment and feedback from local jurisdictions, we announced some core bus service adjustments on September 1st that we pulled back. Those won't be implemented, and all public hearings on that plan have been canceled. So the local bus and mobility paratransit service will continue on their current schedules, but commuter bus and MARC service is operating at reduced levels that began on November 2nd. So our MARC service is operating today on an R schedule. Our commuter bus is operating on an S schedule, which represents about 50% of normal service levels. And we think that these temporary reductions really allow us to preserve those very precious MARC train slots that we're always fighting for with CSX and Amtrak, and our contracts with our commuter bus providers. And we think it allows us to really respond more nimbly as Maryland's economy recovers, and we see more choice riders really cease teleworking and coming back to transit. Due to the sharp decline in transportation revenues, state matching funds for local transit projects aren't available in this year's CTP, but we're going to continue to coordinate closely with our local operators to discuss the availability of local matching funds. Many of them also receive some federal CARES Act funding that can be applied to those projects, and there may be some other available federal funding to support some of those local needs. Throughout all this, though, we've had some good wins. We've stayed really focused on customer service. In August, we launched our real-time tracking for MARC Train via the Transit app, so that can now be used, and we updated our MARC website. So we now have much better real-time of the MARC train with real-time arrival predictions. And we're making some really major investments that are reflected in the CTP, especially in fleet modernization, really across all of our modes. So, we're spending $400 million on the replacement of Metro rail cars and our new signaling system, $160 million on our 53 light rail vehicle fleet overhaul. That'll be complete in 2022. We're investing $54 million to overhaul 63 of our MARC coaches. 7 of those are currently in service. And the CTP also has $207 million dedicated to rehabilitating and redoing our Metro tunnel, track, and other stations. We have some key initiatives as well as we're looking to the future. The Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan was a 2-year effort done in collaboration with an 11-member commission that was finalized in September. We've got a year 1 implementation plan that we've just started, looking at 2 new corridor feasibility studies, ADA accessibility, and a new transfer hub work, and some new venues for regional dialogue and collaboration. We're also undertaking a 50-year statewide transit plan, really looking at how to connect transit across the state, and really look forward to working with stakeholders on that as we look to develop really that long-term framework, that long-term vision for transit in Maryland. With all the challenges that we faced, we got a lot going on with MTA. There's a lot to be excited about. And so thank you again for having us this morning. And I'd like to now pass it to Chrissy Nizer, Administrator at MVA. Thanks. I think you're muted, Chrissy. There you go.
All right, everybody hear me now? Great, thank you. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you to the subcommittee members. I appreciate the opportunity to provide you an update on where we are at M.MBA. Even during these challenge times, we remain focused on providing that premier customer service and making sure we're meeting the needs of our customers. Our major project in terms of the CTP is our Customer Connect IT modernization project. And I know we've talked a lot in prior years about the fact that we were, and still are to a certain extent, on a mainframe-based system. And this Customer Connect project is really intended to move us away from that, allowing us a great deal more flexibility, implement new services, as well as the security that comes with these new software systems. We were originally scheduled to deploy Customer Connect Phase 1. That includes our vehicle services, our business licensing services, and our motor carrier services on Memorial Day weekend. We did have to push that out by a few weeks, but frankly, I'm very proud of the team that we were able to successfully deploy an IT modernization in the middle of a pandemic. As you all know, that's not an easy thing to do under normal circumstances. So on July 6th, we actually rolled out that project. It has allowed us to streamline our services and continue to meet the ever-changing needs of our customers. So I'll just mention a few things that were deployed as a result of Customer Connect. So now our customers who want to get a disability plate or placard can actually do that process entirely online. They do not need to come to the branch office, so that makes it obviously much more convenient and safe now, especially during the pandemic. Also for insurance, they can take care of updating insurance company, providing insurance information, and communicate back and forth with us all electronically. For titling a new vehicle, which is one of the more complex projects, we've actually started a process where you can start that application from home, fill out your information on your vehicle. We actually give you an estimate of what it'll cost. And then when you come in, we scan that information. All the information is preloaded, saves you a lot of time in the branch office. So again, trying to figure out how many things we can do online. And then when you do need to come to the branch, how we can really continue to streamline that process and get you in and out quickly. Obviously, we are an all appointments only situation right now at a diminished capacity due to COVID and the desire to keep everybody safe, whether it's our employees or our customers. We've also tried to look at other ways that we could deliver services online, especially during this challenging time. But frankly, this has been a push for the agency for many years now to deliver more things electronically. We know that's how customers want to do business. And so we've rolled out a new tool recently, which is called First Stop. It's actually the first thing you see when you come to the website. All you have to do is enter your driver's license or vehicle information, and it gives you a personalized list of the services you can do online. It takes you directly to those services. So really the intent is to take the guesswork out of it, make it as easy and streamlined as possible, and hopefully get that customer to exactly what they need on our website. Because there are a lot of services out there, and sometimes somebody might have a hard time finding it. We really want to link them in directly to the services we provide. We've also, during the pandemic, opened up the process for our commercial drivers to be able to get their license renewed, a duplicate and a corrected. Obviously, the same rules apply in terms of having it that photo every 16 years, but for that every other cycle. And if you lose your license, a great option for our commercial drivers who never had that before. Really, when you look at our alternative service delivery numbers, which have clearly been a focus of the committee in prior years, we're really making really good progress. In FY19, we were about 67%. We ended FY20 at 69.4, and actually so far this year we're over 71%. So I think that really shows how the organization has continued to pivot, and especially in light of the circumstances that everybody is dealing with. And frankly, that is only going to continue to increase as we move to phase 2 of Customer Connect. And I really am grateful for the leadership of the secretary and, understanding the importance of that second phase of the deployment that will be our driver license system. And at that point, we really have that 360 view of the customer. So it is such a critical project for the organization. And frankly, I think the whole state, because of how we touch every resident, as well as support many other state agencies, as well as local agencies and what they do. So that will be deployed in December of next year. So December of 2021, about a year away at this point. We are actively working on that project. And, I'm really proud of the fact that despite the pandemic and all the challenging circumstances, we are on budget and we're still on schedule for the project. And so even though we did have a small delay with the first phase implementation, we are actively making up that time and looking good at this point. I also wanted to provide the committee a brief update on Real ID. Obviously, I know that's a topic that's been of great interest. The federal government has pushed back that deadline to October 1 of 2021 in light of the circumstances that everybody is dealing with. That one-year extension does give well over 300,000 Marylanders the opportunity to come in just as part of their regular renewal cycle, which is great. We don't want to, make people feel uncomfortable to have to come in now unnecessarily. I am really proud of our compliance rate. We're well above 71%. Frankly, close to 72% at this point. I guard that number it's very important to me, and I look at it on a regular basis. So we're continuing to make great progress, about 1 percentage point a month. So I think we'll be over 80%, even if the deadline's not moved again. even at the diminished capacity that we're seeing these days. So it's increasing a little less than it was before, but that's because we're, again, keeping that safe number of customers in the branch office. So just to give you a perspective, 38% is the last number that was released from the federal government. That was in September. So compared to the rest of the country, Maryland certainly is looking very good in terms of real ID. And I just want to close by thanking our employees. I know a few of my colleagues, as well as the secretary, mentioned this. They have been so creative during this challenging time, and they've really been on the front lines throughout this entire process. I know people say the branches were closed. That may have been true, but our employees are really still hard at work behind the scenes because of the critical role we play in keeping commerce moving. And we take that very seriously. And, I just am so grateful for our hardworking employees at M.MBA who continue to deliver great service to Maryland residents under, frankly, very challenging circumstances. So very grateful for that. I appreciate your time today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bill Doyle, the MPA Executive Director.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chairman McIntosh, Chairperson McIntosh, Subcommittee Chairman Coleman, and Vice Chair Krim. All the delegates at this hearing this morning, and of course, Secretary Slater. The Port of Baltimore continues to be a strong partner in Maryland's economic recovery and a clear indicator that Maryland's open for business. During COVID-19, the Port of Baltimore continued receiving cargo that helped Maryland's supply chain stay open and focused on safety for all employees. All MPA state-owned terminals remain open for business except the cruise terminal. We just received notice this week that the cruise terminal will not be operational at the earliest before March of 2021. Cruise ship will start opening at a phased schedule in the Port of Miami and Port Canaveral. They're going to try Florida first. While our cargo volumes reached the lowest point in June 2020, the Port of Baltimore benefited from having a diverse portfolio of cargo, protecting the port from greater drops in cargo volumes experienced by other ports across the United States. And even better news, the latest numbers show the Port of Baltimore has bounced back strong, hitting the stride set in record-breaking 2019. The port set a new record in August with 5,536 container moves conducted by longshore workers handling the Maersk Edinburgh, the largest number of container moves for a single ship in the port's 314-year history. The port is seeing increased imports and exports in recent months from many existing clients and new ones. Brand names such as General Electric, Aldi, Tractor Supply, Restoration Hardware, and MTC Logistics, who ships refrigerated and frozen goods. Just as importantly, the port brought back new business to Maryland from Rite Aid, Big Lots, and Levin Furniture. And another positive indicator, imported autos, light trucks unloaded from ships at the port are heading straight to the dealerships instead of waiting for days in a parking lot at the port. Just last week, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Coast Guard, again gave the port its highest rating for security. We have a top-notch security team at the port led by Dave Espy. Congratulations to him. Our dredging is on target. Our Ports America public-private partnership is probably the best in the United States, the best I've seen. They're a pleasure to work with. They're investing hundreds of millions of dollars in the port. This is their shining star, and we're going to keep it that way. I also want to thank all of the employees with the Maryland Port Administration, Port of Baltimore, all the longshoremen, the ILA at the port. They really took this COVID-19 on in a serious way. Social distancing, mask wearing, proper hygiene, and off-duty exercise of their responsibilities. I really appreciate working here in the Port of Baltimore. I want to be here for a long time, and I really want to help this port, this state, be the best port in the United States of America. With that, I'll turn it over to Ricky Smith, CEO of the Maryland Aviation Administration. Thank you.
Mr. Smith?
Sorry.
You're on mute, Mr. Smith.
There you go. Thank you. Sorry about that. So good morning, Chairman, members of the delegation. Thank you again for hearing what's going on with the Maryland Aviation Administration. So in the interest to be brief, to give you more time to ask questions, both you and the Secretary talked about the airport's traffic being down. It continues to hover around 61% since Labor Day, and we expect to see an uptick sometime around this Thanksgiving and Christmas season. But then we'll probably see another drop off in January, as we typically do in this industry. BWI is faring well, however, compared to the rest of the industry, especially the region. Our traffic pretty much doubled that of was more than both of the other two airports in the region back in June and July, and we're now hovering around 48% of the industry of the region, which is remarkable. We did make some changes to respond to the pandemic. One of the most significant changes we made was to close 2 of our parking assets, both of our long-term lots as well as our express service lot. We just didn't have the traffic, and so we're encouraging passengers to use our daily and hourly parking facilities, and that's been working out fine so far. But however, the airport remained open. We took all the steps that you've heard from others in terms of cleaning and sanitizing and disinfecting the facility. We've put a host of other measures in place to comply with executive orders that were issued by the governor, as well as the Anne Arundel County executive. And so we think the airport is doing well. All feedback is that the airport is doing well. With respect to the CTP, this CTP reflects an effort to preserve some important projects, primarily projects that are related to safety. And we think we've done the best with limited resources to accomplish that. We also have a respectable funding level for the airport general aviation system to the tune of $2.35 million in funds for that system. And again, I always want to commend the Secretary for his continued commitment to aviation across the state. These funds are much needed by airports throughout Maryland. But it also includes several airfield projects that are critical to our operations and our safety. Most notably, our Taxiway T project, which is the primary aircraft circulation route around the terminal. This project is funded by $11 million through the CARES Act program, and it's a critical part of our airport circulation system. It also includes the 5-gate extension project on Concourse A, which is nearing completion. That project would be completed, but for 3 concessionaires that are continuing to build out their facilities there. And so we're happy with the opportunity to bring that project online. We just got a FONSI ROD from the FAA, a record of decision for an environmental assessment that has been going on for well over 2 years, almost 3 years. That supports BWI's efforts to move forward with the Southwest Airlines aircraft maintenance facility, which is slated to begin construction middle of next year. It also includes funding for our restroom renovation program, which is a critical customer service amenity for us. Most of our restrooms are very aged and antiquated and dysfunctional, highly maintenance intensive facilities. And so this project will allow us to provide better service to our customers. It also includes the replacement of some of our critical age snow removal equipment that will allow us to continue to provide predictable and reliable snow operations and other maintenance activities to keep the airfield operating in a safety manner. Probably most notably in this CTP is the reflection of a pause of our Concourse A/B baggage handling project. This project is funded primarily through airport revenue bonds. And as you know, the Secretary alluded to earlier, the bond market is a little skittish right now. And so we've decided to pause this project until we get a better feel for how the bond markets will play out, and then we will move on it on this project. We've worked closely with Southwest Airlines on the schedule, and they are on board with this pause plan moving forward. I too want to commend our workforce. We've had an amazing workforce. They've been very resilient and reliable in terms of serving our customers, and they've behaved and embraced all the measures that we put in place to make sure that they and our customers are safe. With that being said, Secretary, that completes my remarks.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks to Ricky and Bill. I shot them a text a few minutes ago, asked them to just kind of shorten up a little bit so we have to make some time for questions. But with that, members of the committee and Chair, I defer to you on any questions you may have. That concludes our briefing for today.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thanks to your whole team. Colleagues, just use the raise hand function under participants, as some of you already have. If you want to ask questions, we'll start with our full committee vice chair, who I neglected to introduce up front, although Secretary Slater was kind enough to recognize him, Vice Chair Jackson.
Yeah, you didn't catch the deer and the leaf beard.
Didn't recognize you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Mr. Secretary, if you could you brief us on your efforts with employees and customers regarding COVID? Unfortunately, we had a very unfortunate incident in Largo, Maryland. But understanding how trying these times are, can you brief the committee on your efforts with COVID across your entire department? Thank you.
Sorry, you're on mute, Mr. Secretary.
I'm sorry, but thank you for the question. Certainly, we've been impacted. So what we've done is a couple of things across the board. We've had a handful of employees over the last year or so get impacted and doing some contact tracing, those types of things. But also some of our kind of partner agencies, whether it's FAA or TSA or some of our contractors or construction employees, sometimes there's some impact there. But what we've done across the board is one, installed some protective devices in all of our facilities, whether it's plexiglass, those types of things, provided all of our employees with PPE, face shields, masks, those types of things, disinfectant, as well as created some social distancing measures. In the beginning, we had continued measures on doing things like staggering shifts. So we were staggering some shifts. You know, a great example of that is over at MDTA and at SHA, creating an environment where you have like A days and B days, where you don't have 4 or 5 folks in a truck, those types of things, and spacing that out. Unfortunately, that has created a little bit of a lag in some of the work. On our transit services, we did things like instituted rear door boarding, those types of things to protect our employees. We're also doing some enhanced cleaning in all of our facilities, as well as the facilities that are mainly internal for our frontline employees, you know, cleaning, disinfecting, going in. BWI Marshall Airport, for instance, we go in every night and really kind of fog that airport and really kind of disinfect that. Over at the MVA, constant cleaning, as well as we just recently we hired a completely different professional cleaning service that specializes in that and went and had all of our facilities cleaned. And then when we have instances, kind of isolating those, doing some detailed contact tracing, those types of things. Most recently, we've been doing some other educational type activities, focused on talking to our employees about being safe at home as well, because especially the ones that work in retail type environments with us, whether it's the MBA or over at really our transit operators, those types of things over at the airport, being able to understand that if they go home and they kind of do some things where they're exposed and they bring that back, that's a challenge for all of our customers as well. So over at the port, you know, we did some things really focused on protecting our employees to protect that supply chain. But really, we put a number of measures in place. In fact, we're getting ready to prepare a report. It was a request from DLS on kind of the number of employees that we've had impacted. I feel like we've fared relatively well compared to what I see in some of our other departments, specifically on the transit side. I have a good friend who is the CEO over at SEPTA, and they've had some pretty challenging issues, as well as General Manager Wiedefeld over at WMATA. They've had some pretty significant issues. Right now, our biggest challenge on the transit operator side is really kind of looking at the contact tracing. If one of our operators gets exposed to the point where we need to go safety first. So that could potentially start to impact some of our service. Just having enough operators to be able to kind of provide those services is critical. But that's just more of a broad-based overview, Delegate. If you had a specific question, I know Administrator Nizer is here with some things specific to Largo because we were really focused on that. She and I had a lot of conversations going through there, just kind of focusing on safety first across the board.
Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your general overview. That's terrific for us, and with the local officials in the county, Administrator Nizer has done a terrific job. And just a quick follow-up. You spoke of contracting folks to clean your facilities. So during this COVID process, speak very briefly about how these contracts are awarded during this time.
So I can jump in on that, Secretary Slater, if you'd like. So thank you for the question, Delegate Jackson. I just want to say we're a family at M.MBA, and it really hurt all of us personally when that happened with the Largo employee, and certainly grief services and things like that for our employees. That's an important piece of it in addition to some of the things the Secretary mentioned. But yeah, so we have contracts at all of our facilities. What we did as soon as the new requirements came out from the CDC in terms of cleaning related to COVID is we asked all of those vendors to certify not only that they were cleaning up to those standards, but they were using the appropriate chemicals that were necessary and required by CDC. So we're using existing contracts for that. We had one contract which was for kind of an on-call janitorial services in case we got in a situation where we needed anywhere in the state to be able to provide it. So as an extra measure, as the Secretary mentioned in Largo, we had this external cleaner come in and take care of the facility there just to give the employees that extra sense of assuredness that it really was, thoroughly cleaned and secure for them to be there.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I can jump in as well, Secretary. So for BWI Marshall, our cleaning services, our basic cleaning services are handled by a firm called Chimes. It's a sheltered workshop. In those cases where they cannot provide the level of cleaning expertise, for example, we upgraded our cleaning services to sanitation and disinfecting. Those were services that they did not have a specialization in, so they were able to subcontract to companies to bring those services to the airport. And so we basically use existing contracts, just expanded on the expertise that we needed.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I do want to follow up Administrator Nizer. As you know, there's a published article today about the MVA's telework policies. We have employees who apparently never interact with customers, do everything electronically. We're 8 months into this, but apparently they can't telework. Do you want a chance to respond to that?
So actually, we have a great number of our employees who are actively teleworking. That number's up to about 330 employees. We actually just added more, I think 20 more the beginning of last week, and we're actively working on adding additional. M.MBA is a little bit of different operation. So even our agents who are not maybe physically serving the customer, in many ways directly support that customer. So even some of the folks who are in our central office still need to have access to secure inventory like plates and titles because they're in the process of issuing them. They can't do that remotely. Some of the personal information that's mailed in. But I will say Customer Connect enabled us, those 20 employees that I just talked about really are in areas that Customer Connect has now enabled things to be done electronically more, and they're at least teleworking part-time. So we continue to reevaluate that. But I would say the idea that we don't have a large percentage of our employees teleworking is not necessarily accurate. That, like I said, that number is over 320, and we're continuing to evaluate. So if there are additional opportunities, then we want to make sure that happens. But there are just some functions of the MBA that are not something that, is capable of teleworking for.
Yeah, so I don't, if I said that you don't have a large percentage teleworking, I didn't mean it. I think the article says 1/5. I think the question is, are there individuals who are describing their positions as ones that they believe they can telework in who aren't being given the opportunity to telework? I think that's what I'd ask you to just take
Yeah, so we define it based on positions. Yeah, I'm sorry if I mischaracterized it, but I think the article kind of gave that impression a little bit. And we define it based on what their function is. So if the function is something that can be done through teleworking, then obviously that opportunity is provided to them. It is not, I want to be very clear, it is not an issue of not having enough laptops. I will say the secretary has been great in that if the business unit doesn't have enough, TSO is offered laptops. So it is not that kind of an issue. It really is about the function that the employee is performing.
Thank you. Vice Chair Crum?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Slater, for being here and all of your staff. And of course, congratulations to you and your staff for performing so well during this difficult period. I want to talk a little bit about the CTP and specifically the CIP and the reductions. So I will just give as an example, because I'm very interested in it, the Route 15 reduction for the preliminary engineering. As I see it, that has been reduced through 2026, the amounts dedicated to that project. I have heard you say in previous committee hearings that you believe it's a 2-year plan to get us back on track at MDOT and the Transportation Trust Fund. So my question is, why are we reducing that, or I guess eliminating that expenditure through 6 years? I don't want us to come up to the point where we're competing again to get on a list for to be on track to get that project done. So can you talk a little bit about that? Thank you.
I sure can. Thank you. Let me first say that one of the things that we did in the CTP tours is, and at times it was challenging, and what I really tried to do was somewhat pin down our local governments, our local delegations on really what that big priority was and what's most important, so that if there were opportunities to fund something further in the final CTP, because the financials are changing pretty frequently, just to make sure we had a solid understanding of kind of what that was. Probably the easiest conversation we had was Frederick County, where everybody was rallied around US 15 and said that that was clearly their top priority. So that's one that's definitely on our radar. The challenge that we have in this 2-year recovery is it's not necessarily a model where you look at the next 2 years and then everything's perfect after 2 years. As we start to recover, we'll get back to kind of where we were financially, and then you start to look at the different cash flows across the program, across that 6-year program. So, what I'm saying is, the financial situation today is going to be very different a year from now. We hope that it's going to be much better, and we're going to see that really significant V curve, and then we'll be able to start populating that stability across that 6-year program. So just because money is not in there for next year doesn't mean that next year it won't be in there for next year. So I think it's just such an evolving situation, and what we're trying to do really hard is one, focus on that system preservation, but also that next wave of development and evaluation program projects that I would put US 15 in that category, along with many others. I think our key is really going to be looking at that adaptive capacity on the systems. We have a tremendous amount of work to do on our roadway systems in kind of getting enough pipeline projects where, we need to redesign and rethink a lot of these urban arterials to make them a little bit more pedestrian friendly. We need to have that next wave of transit projects. We need to have that next wave of kind of foundational system projects. So, just really thinking about that. And I would put US 15 on that category as one that we generally have consensus in the region that that's their top priority. And so when we look for projects in that area, that's the one that we're going to focus on.
Okay, I see that, but is there any, sorry. Is there anything that we can see that would say that in 2 years we're not competing again to get on the list for funding. I think that is what I want to hear. Okay, that's it.
Sure, I can, we can look at, certainly share the financial models that we're looking at in terms of that. I think when it comes to competing, it's, from my perspective, it's always about kind of one, local priorities, two, what does the data tell you in terms of where you can get your greatest bang for your buck, three, kind of the need perspective. I see US 15 as a project that, one, solves a pretty significant congestion problem. Two is a really top priority. So when you look at that data and prioritization and kind of consensus there, I do think it's one that competes really well, with the rest of the needs that we have in the state. But I don't sit here today and tell you that we have like a ranking order that says this is the next one, this is the next one, this is the next one. I think it's really about looking at what our needs are statewide and where we can get the greatest kind of bang for our buck to meet some of those needs. But it is across highway and transit and the port and the airport and those needs across the board. But I do see that as one that competes really well, and I do see one that if there's an opportunity to put something in the D&E program, that would definitely be part of that conversation.
So you're saying that if we got perhaps an infrastructure bill from the federal government or some other type of funding, that would be a project that you would see coming back in?
Yes, and frankly, it's funny. I've been having a lot of conversations with our federal partners on what a potential infrastructure bill could look like. What does a backstop look like, which I think is more operational. But there's a lot of talk on infrastructure as a stimulus type of a package, and so I think nationwide there's a real crisis in terms of having states that have a lot of projects on the shelf. They're just not there. So I can tell you that that the folks that I'm talking to right now are really using that term shovel-ready-ish kind of a thing, where those shovel-ready projects are not there, so those requirements are going to be a little bit different. For the most part, they're going to look at that as kind of a NEPA type of an approach, or something that's in that environmental process, and US 15 definitely meets that category.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will defer to my colleagues right now, but I do hope we have a discussion of the purple line moving forward. Thank you.
Don't worry, Madam Vice Chair, that's on my list. I'm just waiting for everybody else to get through theirs. Delegate Kittleman.
Yes, it was first on my list, but I'll ignore it. Mr. Chairman, I have a bunch of questions. Do you want me to ask them until you get tired of listening to me, or wait, just do one at a time?
Just let it roll, Delegate Kittleman.
All right. The simplest one is on the Bay Bridge. I may have missed it, but are we going to have toll booths on both sides?
Neither. So
I'm sorry. I meant Easy Pass. My mistake.
Okay. So no. So the tolling on the Bay Bridge is just eastbound. There's no really plan to kind of change that to this point. Once we removed the toll booths, we moved the gantries over to the Kent Island side. So they're on the other side of the bridge today, but there's still an eastbound toll. But
you have thought about putting them on each side? Has a tendency to make a difference for traffic trucks. I think it was a long time ago, but might be something to think about.
I'm not sure if you were over at MDOT when that kind of strategic decision was made to just switch it to the one side. I wasn't involved, but I have not been involved in any discussions to kind of change that decision.
I think it was because of the toll boost, but anyway, that's something that I just wanted to ask about. I on a broader basis, I'm wondering if you have given, or SHA has given any thought to the percentage of the Transportation Trust Fund that continues to grow for transit. And I don't have a big problem with funding transit, but the revenues from driving, it appears, are going to go down as electric cars come, et cetera, et cetera. And if transit is continually built, if we build the Purple Line and other things, every time we build a new transit facility, it builds in an automatic increase in operating costs because they all run at a deficit. And I just wondered if you had, looking out into the future, given any thought to how that's going to play out.
Well, the current CTP has, I was just pulling up my number, 39.6% of the capital budget is state highway, and 39.2% of the budget is on the transit side. So I think that's a pretty balanced program today. Although, you know, I think you noted there are larger operating costs for the transit side, but you know, we're certainly working hard to kind of meet the needs of all of our customers, and all of it's important to us, and we're trying to do our best to kind of meet the needs. And on the transit side, we're really trying to focus on, frankly, the people that need us the most, the ones that don't have other alternatives, and I think we're doing a pretty good job at that.
The numbers you just gave me, is that just for the capital side? Because what I was talking about was well, I guess we are talking, but on the operating side, it's 61% of the TTF and 41% for MTA alone, according to those numbers. And that's where I was concerned.
You mean on the operating budget side? Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think our transit systems, just by nature, are always going to have a larger operating budget than our highway side. Just, you know, the highway side is more kind of maintenance, those types of things, where transit is a service, so it's more of that operating side. But you know, we're always kind of looking for ways that we can maximize that value, and but certainly, you know, we look at our budget and the balance across the board a lot.
Okay, so there haven't real. Oh, never mind. This is I get confused at times because we have the monies that we pay, and then we have federal funds, and there were a couple of times. In your reports, did you make a difference between the federal funds? Are they decreasing or increasing? We talked about revenues in the things that the state charges, but I wondered how the federal pieces are doing.
So for the most part, they're somewhat flat, with the exception of the money that we got from the CARES Act. So the CARES Act came in two categories, one in transit. We put all of that in operating, and the other one was on the aviation side. We were able to kind of invest that back and kind of create some of the backstop there. The challenge with federal funding today, although the obligation authority numbers are somewhat flat, the less, as our state dollars go down, we have more challenges with some of the match. We have been able to use some of our toll credits, which are a complex category in itself, to try and match that to get to 100% federal. And some of the recent legislation has allowed us to go to 100% federal in certain categories. So we're trying to maximize that, and we've been doing a pretty good job at maximizing those federal funds. But as the state funding goes down and the federal funding remains flat, then it creates this situation where it's hard to kind of maximize that.
Okay, thank you. With respect MTA, I'm sorry. I'm getting feedback. I just wanted to ask the thought about preparing a 50-year transit plan. My immediate reaction is, in 50 years, we may not even, maybe we'll be beaming places, and automatic vehicles are going to make a huge difference. And I don't know exactly how a 50-year plan is going to be useful.
Sure. Let me let Kevin kind of touch on that. But I mean, I think the autonomous world is big in transit as well. So there's a lot of autonomous shuttle development, and Kevin and I have been looking at some of those things and how that all works together. But let me let Kevin touch on that 50-year plan, because I think it's
so that was part of the consideration, the impact that okay.
Yeah, just to comment on that, it's a great question. It's one that we get a lot, right? 50 years, it's pretty far out, right? I think we're trying to be bold and trying to be visionary as it relates to transit. I think there's a recognition that our locally operated transit systems are going to be really key. It's a recognition of the importance of commuter rail and sort of the emergence of kind of mega regions that you see really, around the country, of DC and New York and Philadelphia, that there are these mega regions that pop up. I think COVID is really interesting, and the impacts that that's had on this that we'll now need to consider, as a pandemic and things like that kind of change ridership patterns. But, there are some growth patterns that we're seeing, whether it's in the cities and suburbs and how those are changing. And, perhaps more importantly, I think, we're trying to take a real high level view of how these systems connect. So whether it's the local systems with the MARC train and fare reciprocity, who recognizes which fare, the type of transit, are we looking at BRT or light rail? I think we're trying to take a real high level view and trying to be bold and really setting in place a big vision for transit for the state of Maryland.
But you also do like 20-year plans and
Right.
10-year plans.
Yeah, so we're working with each of the MPOs for the region, for the state, really, and taking a look at the modeling that they do, and certainly building that into the work that we're doing.
And I think this is my last question. I know Mark and I have talked, and I had a call earlier today about the issue of the commuter bus lines who are in the process of facing a significant cut. And I understand you are close, you're negotiating with them. I just wondered if you had any more comments on how that's going and what you see as the outcome.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. So as you know, our commuter bus ridership has dropped really quite dramatically. We're 90% down, and so we've reduced service levels to right around 55% of normal service. Is still running right now, and altering service to adjust service to where the demand is. And I'm really sympathetic. I want to be really loud and clear about this. That I'm so sympathetic to those commuter bus providers, many of which have been contractors with MTA for a number of years, many of which are kind of family-owned businesses. I get that. We are working with them. Our procurement and legal teams. We've had several meetings this week, and I think we're hopefully just kind of a few days away from really being able to get back to them with kind of what we're thinking in terms of trying to help them out. We are constrained a bit by some of the contractual requirements, the way that our contracts are written. But absolutely, it's top of mind for me and something that we're working on, and hopefully we'll have resolved in the next few days.
I'm sorry, when you say contract issues that constrain, you're saying MTA, such as, I'm not sure exactly how that works, which is it make it impossible or hard for you to do certain things, or for
so
private
the
entities?
contracts. Sure. So it's a good question. So the contracts are written in such a way that we can only pay for service that is provided. So we're being asked to provide a subsidy or some sort of payment outside of miles that are traveled, right? And
you got to renegotiate those contracts. I'm sorry.
Sure. So yeah. So whether it's a contract renegotiation or a Board of Public Works item, we're trying to get creative with how we can keep these companies afloat for when we come out of this on the other side. I want to be sitting having this conversation 6 months from now, and all of our commuter bus providers are still there, are still active, and are able to ramp up their operations to meet a ridership demand that may return.
Okay, I just want to make one comment from a philosophical point of view, that having seen what has been happening to smaller businesses, private enterprise, I think they've suffered more than any other entity, obviously other than individuals, since this thing has begun. And I hope that when we are, or if you are weighing having to do, I guess they are going to have to lay off and have laid off a lot of employees. And if they can't, ultimately they will go out of business if they can't recover. And I had asked, are we facing the same kind of things? Is the state looking at having to furlough any of the employees? I mean, I just want to make sure we treat the private enterprise equal, if not better, than we do government.
On the MTA side, we're not having discussions about laying folks off. Secretary, I don't know if you want to chime in here.
No, certainly that's not part of our conversation today.
But it's okay for the private businesses to have to lay off folks. That's my,
I certainly don't want them to have to lay off anyone. And I think we're trying to, again, work as creatively as we can within our legal contractual mechanisms to help them out. And we're not going to do anything outside the legal bounds that we have to work with.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Kittleman. Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to join the briefing. This is my my second favorite subcommittee behind EED, so it's good to join you all this morning. And Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. I wanted to just first off thank your team for really being incredibly accessible through a difficult time period. Administrator Quinn and his team on the Purple Line. I know Delegate Corman's got a number of questions, but appreciate the team coming out and doing a couple of walkthroughs in our community. Sitting on Zooms for a really long time, a couple of weeks. So there's really been a strong commitment to being open and transparent with our community during a difficult transition period. And I appreciate that, and appreciate your comments on in the CTP hearings that we've had in our regions. I know I just wanted to briefly mention Montgomery Hills again. I know we're going to be talking with Administrator Smith in a couple of weeks, but it seemed like there was a lot of agreement, particularly from our county executive and folks in our delegation, to really highlight that as one of our number one road priorities going forward. So I'm hoping that we can find, in a new, a slightly more flexible CTP going forward, that we can find that money, hopefully for this year to finish the planning. But the question that I had specifically was just around, the 495 project, and obviously the DEIS period is now closed, and there were thousands of comments that were put in, but just a couple of things I think that really struck me. There was obviously the declaration, the official rejection from the Capital Parks and Planning Commission. And then I think, what was really noteworthy to me was the letter that came from the Naval Support Activity Center, earlier this month, that clearly said they would not be giving up any of their land, frankly, due to national security concerns, which is pretty stunning to me to come from the Navy. So it didn't know, sort of what the next steps are. Obviously, I know your team is reviewing it, but and then obviously the huge change in commuting patterns and telecommuting and what your team is looking at to take all of that into account, whether there is going to be a reassessment of the project, as well as a host of other information that's come out on some of the utility movements. So just wanted to get an update from you and what the agency's timing is going forward now.
Sure, thank you for the question. Really great to see you. One day I'm going to be able to figure out how to do those Zoom backgrounds. We don't use Zoom a lot, so I can't, so we don't get well versed in that. But
it took me 7 months, so don't feel bad.
Let me touch on Montgomery Hills first. I think firsthand, that's a project that I took through the NEPA process, the planning process early on. It's a project that's right there as one of the top projects in my mind when we're able to move, and certainly that's one of those projects that I think are critical, and frankly, a great example. I use that one as well as US 1 in College Park as a great example of roadways that are arterial roadways that need a complete overhaul. And so I can tell you that one is right on my mind constantly if there are opportunities. So we'll keep at that one together. When I touch on the Beltway, I think, you look at what really the Beltway 270 piece, there's a couple of things there. The comment period closed Monday. One of the things that I've asked the team to do is, that comment period was the time for us to really do nothing but listen. And so what I've asked the team to do is set up some time with me and walk through all of those comments. So it's really detailed comments when it comes to what we're hearing from our major stakeholders, like the Navy, like Maryland National Capital Park and Planning, like each of the counties that are impacted, like the residents and some of the community groups. And I want to understand what those concerns are, and really what some of you get positive comments and you get negative comments, and I want to understand both sides of that, so that we can, one, have that influence, whatever the selected alternative may be, but two, how we move forward and account for all of the changing travel dynamics in the system today. I will tell you that, so our focus right now is clearly right around the American Legion Bridge. And so trying to understand what that connection is with Virginia's next project and how that all accounts. But that's really our focus, is that bridge and how that can go forward. And there's really a lot of conversation that can continue to take place on the rest of the system. And I want to, I want to get us to a point that these travel dynamics are changing pretty regularly, and we want to make sure that this is a big NEPA document, and I want to make sure we leave some windows open for some other areas when we kind of move that bridge piece and as that evolves. But the only thing that we have the ability to even start to have a conversation with beyond planning right now is the 270 corridor focused on the American Legion Bridge. So we certainly do not have the ability to move anything past planning outside of that corridor. So we're going to continue to kind of look at that. But I'd be happy to sit down with you and other members of the delegation after the team kind of walks through all those comments with me and kind of walk through that. What I can see is is there a sweet spot that we can find? Is there some consensus that we can find around some way to kind of resolve the concerns, but also find a way to kind of impact the system in a positive way?
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. I think we'd all appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
I don't see any more questions from my colleagues, so I'm going to ask a series of questions, Mr. Secretary, to you and your team, just to orient us. The traffic relief plan that Delegate Solomon was just discussing, it's on SHA-SW-5. First of all, I didn't clearly hear. Have you read the Navy's comment? It's a pretty short comment. It's a 2-page letter.
I'm sorry, you were breaking up a little bit, and I don't know if it's me or you, but yes. So just recently, just this last week, I asked the team about that because I started to hear about that. And so my reaction to the team was that I wanted to know if we had responded to that letter, and we had not yet. But two, I was a little bit concerned that the tone of the letter illustrated what I would call kind of a not super productive dialogue. So we wanted to I asked the team to get together and sit down with them and understand those concerns. I think certainly some of the concerns that they've raised are pretty significant and serious, and we want to work through that with them and really talk through all of those with them. I have read them.
Thank you. When I look at SHA-SW-5, I see a relatively small budgeted expenditure for the traffic relief plan and then zero in future years. And I just want to confirm there's your expectation that there will be zero state taxpayer dollars spent on the traffic relief plan. Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yeah. I can't. I think I'm getting enough of you. There's something a little bit breaking up, but I'm not quite sure whether it's you or me.
Yeah, I think it's me.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. So the project, I think we need to understand too, it's this no net cost. So the dollars that we're expending today in project development will be recovered when you close financially on the project. And that will continue. So, as we're spending dollars today, they'll be recovered in that cost neutral perspective. And that's a big part of the conversations that we're having with the prospective bidders today.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Mr. Secretary? Great. Okay, so let's turn to MTA 33, which is the purple line. And I'm curious about two things to the extent you can share them. One is the timeline for a decision on how we're going to move forward. I understand there's different options to move forward. I'm not asking you to tell us, no spoilers. I'm just asking for a timeline as to when we might know something about the path forward. You're on mute, Mr. Secretary.
I was unmuted and I muted myself, so I apologize. But yeah, so we're going down several paths. I think we're continuing discussions. I'm going to have another discussion over the weekend with them, and we spoke yesterday, and so we're continuing to look at that as a positive dialogue. But at the same time, Matt and Kevin and the team on the ground are continuing to make sure that construction. We took over 100 plus subcontracts, and our focus in this kind of transition period, wherever we land, is to one, complete the design and get the permits in place, but two, move the utilities. Those are activities that we feel lower the risk of a project that we put back out on the street, and we can gain that value back. But I want to be clear that Purple Line is going to get done. We're focused on what that is. and really making sure that we're delivering it no matter what the path is. And I can tell you that our team is working hard on the ground to keep those things advancing. We're working on not only the day-to-day project work, but the financial model so that we can make sure that we're covered that way. But at the same time, we have some pretty productive discussions happening right now that we're hoping will advance very aggressively over the next several weeks.
So maybe something in the next several weeks. Okay. And I know something of interest to this subcommittee is the potential cost impacts to the state of the various options in terms of out of the CTP, what the range of impacts might be depending on how this moves forward. So if you can give us sort of a range of state taxpayer cost.
So you're talking about potential financial impacts to the purple line, to the budget. So what we're doing is looking at a couple of different things. The purple line is financed through, one, federal funding still available to us, two, transit revenue bonds, and three, TIFIA. And so there's private sector equity kind of coming in, but those funding sources are available to us as well. And so as our backstop there, we look at how we can kind of get those revenue sources moving. The interest rates on TIFIA are much better today than they were when we originally put that project out. So there's a lot of savings that can be had in that regard to be able to kind of make up for any of that. But right now, we're focused on kind of understanding what it would take. We obviously have to kind of big this out and get that kind of final schedule and construction piece there. But we don't really know exactly what that impact is going to be yet. We do have some estimates, but we don't think it's going to be a major impact for us. And so what we're trying to do is one, minimize that impact to the current CTP so that we can take whatever cost increase may come and bake that into the future availability payments on whatever partnership we put out there so that we can kind of stretch that out, but also recover some of those costs, one, in value by eliminating the risk, but two, in refinancing the TIFIA. Anything you want to add there, Kevin?
No, I think you hit it all well. Nothing to add.
I think you're muted, Delegate. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. I switched over to my phone. My speaker problems, and I forgot how to unmute. So moving on to WMATA page 6, which I guess is you, Mr. Secretary, since you're on the WMATA board. That's the state's regular capital contribution to WMATA, so separate from the dedicated funding. It shows an increase of close to 2% fiscal year over fiscal year, but the state law requires, if certain conditions are met by WMATA, a 3% increase in that amount. So I'm just curious if you looked at that and if you can explain the lower increase, and if not, at this moment, maybe you'll want to follow up with me or have Jacqueline Hartman follow up.
Sure. No, I can certainly follow up. I haven't looked at it from a percentage standpoint, but we've been working pretty closely with them and their budget situation, which is pretty challenging as well. They did identify some benefits from the CARES Act. They had a significant amount of portion there. But one of the things they've been looking at is, one, their operating budget, but two, their capital budget, because we want to make sure that if anything on the capital side gets deferred, that it's not these critical safety projects that are really important to their success. So we're working pretty closely with them, but I would say for the most part, WMATA's budget has pretty much remained flat. I mean, they have not really been impacted a whole lot at all. When it comes to our state contribution, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm just referring to there's a state statute, so this is not about what WMATA wants. It's about what the state law requires in terms of an increase. So I just ask you to take a look at that, and again, happy to follow up with you. And not that I'm not put you on the spot. Shifting over to MTA 19, which is an electric bus purchase, which I'm very excited about. One, thank you. I think it's great that you guys are keeping your commitments there. I am curious. I know the governor's greenhouse gas emissions reduction plan calls for 50% of your bus fleet, Administrator Quinn, to be electric by 2030. I'm just sort of curious how the CTP is going to sort of bring us to that point.
Great question, and a big focus of mine, not only with our MTA fleet, but also SHA's fleet and MDTA's fleet, as well as the big benefit that we get is when that fleet converts out on our roadway system today. But the first initial bus purchases, as well as the infrastructure that's coming, we got a federal grant for that, and we were really excited about that as being part of it. So there's a couple of things that we're looking at as we start to convert this over the years. Is one, adjusting our contracts so we have that. The challenge over the years was always, and I'm going to ask Kevin to correct me because I've been kind of jumping in on this, but the challenge was always one, making sure that you had enough infrastructure and workforce to keep those buses moving and maintained and the right folks trained to be able to work on them. But two, the technology a few years ago was tough because it wasn't really showing a lot of those electric buses could handle some of the heavy demands associated with some of the more demanding routes. We think that conversation is getting better, so we thought it was the right time for us to bring in some of those electric bus fleets and start to make that conversion. But we're having those conversations, not only on the bus side, but on the rail side and what we can do with some of those electric conversions. But it's a big focus of ours, and we're trying to be mindful of what those commitments are, not only with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act, but also the conversations around TCI and the conversations around RGGI and making sure that we're not kind of putting things off to the last minute, and we're starting to lay that foundation now with our infrastructure to maintain and operate those systems, but also what's needed in being able to kind of contractual mechanisms to have those as an option. In the next couple of years, our contracts will probably allow for both, but we've been focused on kind of zero emission type vehicles. But Kevin, anything else you want to add on your front?
I'll just add, we are in the process of finishing our electric bus study of taking a look at, what technology we think best fits MTA. As the secretary noted, there's a lot of considerations. We take a look at our facilities. So, if you go to any of our facilities today, you'll see that, our buses are really kind of stacked like sardines in there. They're stacked pretty tight. And when you start putting in, say, charging stations or catenary charging stations or whatever the technology is, you got to look at your facility impacts as well. We've also been having discussions with the union. We need to change our contract with the union to now reflect a mechanic that is a lot more like an IT technician than a wrench turning mechanic, right? So there's real changes in training and technology, and then testing out buses. We have been testing out different types of electric buses. Baltimore is a very hilly place, and so as we take a look at the geography, some of them perform better on hills. Some of them perform better in colder weather. We do get cold winters here, so there's a lot of warmer climates that have been able to adapt more quickly to electric technology. And so we just want to pick the technology that's right for us and be sure we're investing in the right facilities and the right types of vehicles.
Great, and I appreciate your efforts on it. Just spoiler alert, there's going to be legislation again, as there was last year, that you helped inform about making sure that your successors someday, many years from now, follow through on the great commitments you two have already made. Let me go to SHA SW6. This is one that's extremely important to many of my colleagues, which is highway user revenue. It actually looks to me like the amount continues to increase, until 2024 when the mandate ends, which I guess I'm pleasantly surprised by because I understood that was a percentage-driven figure of basically gas tax revenue, which is down. So I'm just curious what you see happening there and if I'm reading that correctly.
I'm not sure if Jacqueline's on. She wants to kind of help me out with some of this, but yes, it's a percentage-driven number. So we just basically take that percentage of our TTF and dedicate that. Unfortunately, as the revenue started to decline, some of those percentages declined. But what you see probably is the recovery that we start to model over this 2-year period. And so I don't know, Jacqueline, you want to add anything? You've been living and breathing the highway user revenues a little bit.
Sure. Jacqueline Hartman, Chief Financial Officer for the Maryland Department of Transportation. So we do have the HUR numbers that basically just kind of track to our revenues. It is a percentage-based calculation off of our revenues, off of the department's revenues. And it generally matches what we're seeing on the revenue side, that we do, despite some hits to revenue in 20 and 21, we do see growth happening beyond in those future years.
Great. I know many of my colleagues will be very happy about that. And my last question, Mr. Secretary, is about Appendix A, which is the scores. Now that you've had sort of a cycle as secretary, or most of a cycle, I'm curious what you think of that scoring system and if it actually adds any value.
Let me see if I can pull it up here real quick. I don't think I can get it, but let me kind of answer your question more generally. I'm a big performance-based guy, and I think any kind of data-driven techniques are good for us. And so, you know, when I'm looking at safety projects, I want safety projects that can save the most amount of lives. When I'm looking at transit projects, I want transit projects that connect and give the most of the people accessibility to jobs, those types of things. And so I think it's really about performance and where we can get the greatest value. I think when you're looking at performance, whether it's the scoring mechanism or a different type of performance program, it's really about looking at kind of the impact and the positive benefit to people. But I am generally supportive of any kind of performance-based system that helps us prioritize where we can get our greatest bang for our buck.
Yeah, I mean, there's 39 scored projects. Only 4 of them are transit projects, despite Delegate Kittleman informing us that 39% of the capital budget goes to transit. So it just seems like I'm not sure we're really hitting there on the things that we need to be hitting on, or maybe there are jurisdictions that are not participating in it and putting those $5 million plus projects forward for scoring. I view that Appendix A as a hangover from a period of disagreement between the legislature and the executive branch. And I'm just not sure it's delivering a lot of value added, although it's printing more paper on the CTP, I guess, electronic paper. Delegate Metzger, did you have a question? I saw you were using the hand waving. I wasn't sure if you were trying to ask a question earlier.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, thank you so kindly. This has been a very good, informative presentation today, and I want to thank everybody involved. But earlier, I almost forgot my questions when Delegate Kittleman was asking several. But my question goes to Secretary Slater and Director Ricky Smith for the Martin State Airport. Secretary Slater, I believe you might have got an email from a constituent concerned that maybe we can create some real revenue. I think I mentioned this to you back earlier. Maybe really looking at Martin State Airport to do some commuter airport stuff at that airport, because it's able to take a huge, we've got lots of inroads and sort of things to really create some extra revenue through the aviation and transportation. I thought would zero in on that for just a moment. And then I have another question.
Yes, Secretary, if you don't mind, I can.
Let me touch on that and I'll kick that over to Ricky. But, you know, I occasionally an email will slip through me, but I haven't, I'm not recalling getting one. If you have one from your constituent that you can share with me, I'm happy to take a look at it. But let me hand it over to Executive Director Smith and touch on that a little bit.
Okay. Yes, Delegate Metzer, I recall the email. We're going through the process of getting an environmental assessment approved for Martin State Airport. Once that is done, we will engage in a master planning process for that airport. As a part of that master planning process, we will look at all future opportunities for Martin. Establishing commuter service, however, particularly if it's commercial commuter service, will be a challenge. It will redefine the airport. It will define how the airport is positioned in the national aviation system. It will require significant infrastructure changes to the airport to accommodate that kind of service, but it is something that we look at during our master planning process.
Well, with the 1 million square foot building that's across the street and the redevelopment of Blue Ocean, it's really an opportunity because of Mark Train going to be expanding over there. So it's really something to take a look at. And Secretary Slater, kind of a follow-up, I'd like to schedule something with you to do a walkthrough in our Edgemere area for some walkways. I'm sure you've been in touch with in front of the high schools and so forth. We need to really take a look at some sidewalks and some safety issues there. Moving right along to Secretary Ms. Chrissy Nizer at the DMV, if she could jump on for just a second. I've had many conversations with, I used to be a car salesman for 27 years. So a lot of people still contact me, a lot of the dealers and so forth. The DMV tags, there are people still driving around with temporary tags from like June, July, and they can't get their insurance violations straightened out. They can't get their tags straightened out. The dealers are having a struggle. So kind of fill me in a little bit. I'm really upset because on our Secretary of Labor side, we got 94% of people's got their unemployment, and the 6% is right here in Essex. and we're talking about the DMV area, everybody, but all the 27% is right here in Essex. So I need some energy here.
Well, Delegate, I'd certainly be happy to work with you on specific cases. So if you get contact, whether it's dealers or constituents directly, I mean, I will say that our partners had the same challenge we had in terms of migrating to a new IT system. Under the prior system, they essentially would send us data. There was no data verification. We weren't checking external systems to make sure it was the correct bin and things like that, as you're probably familiar with. The new system really has those measures in place. So it does require a little more attention to detail by our partners. We've certainly worked through that issue with some of them. But there should not be any temporary tags out there from June and July. We are fairly caught up. I mean, there still remains just challenges that we're now receiving a lot more work by mail and drop-off work as opposed to by appointment, because, you know, we have reduced appointments in the branch office. So we are shifting our resources appropriately to meet that demand. But if there are specific instances, please, I'd be happy to help anybody through the process. We do have individuals in the insurance division, you know, responding to those type of issues. We have modified certain procedures. So if you have certain flags, you can renew for a year to allow, you know, just in light of COVID and challenges of getting payments made for vehicle registration. So we've tried to be creative where we can, but there really is no reason somebody should still be on temporary tags. I will say the good news is the executive order extends them. So they actually are technically legal under Governor Hogan's executive order, but we want to help them out and make sure they get the services they need.
Thank you so kindly. Appreciate it. And I will reach out to you next week.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.
And Delegate, happy to work with you on the Edgemere issue. I have a little bit of history on that one from my time at State Highway, and happy to do that. Also important to note, based on your comments, that we did work with the county executive over in Baltimore County, and we're in the final stages of that transit-oriented development designation for Martin State. So it should be a nice opportunity up there for them.
Maybe get a chance. We'll come together and do a drive-through.
Great. Thank you, Delegate Metzger, and also I thank Administrator Nizer and her team, Ellie Simmons in particular, who do a lot of great constituent work on things like Delegate Metzger was describing. It's not all in Essex. We have some of it in Bethesda too. With that, Mr. Secretary, any closing comments before we sign off?
Just a couple of quick comments. Thank you for having us. Two, as I always state, you know, we don't have to wait for these calls to have a dialogue. If you ever need to kind of reach out, it's important to me that I'm accessible and our whole team is accessible, and we work through these issues. And then just a little bit more on the housekeeping side, we've had a couple of our team kind of move on to different opportunities. Jeff Tozzi, who is our Director of Legislative Affairs, has moved on to MES, and Tom Curtin, who is our Chief of Staff, has moved on to the National Governors Association for a different role. And so I have two folks kind of have jumped into those roles. One, Pilar Helm, who is our State Legislative Officer. She's taken over kind of Jeff's seat and kind of working through that with Melissa Einhorn. So those two ladies are taking on that one. And then Samantha Biddle is taking over for Tom Curtin. Samantha is a fellow planner and has worked with me for many years. And now she's in a dark office there, probably right next to me, just kind of turned her camera on. But I will make sure that you and the committee have their contact information if there is anything that we or any of them can do to help you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. All those folks, and appreciate you and your team being here. Thank you to my colleagues and staff for putting this together. And everybody have a good weekend and a happy, healthy Thanksgiving. Thank you all.